Fantasy football draft prep is in full swing here at RotoWire. Today we are talking tiers for the running back position. Now, this is something I like to do for any big draft that I have coming up. I'll go over to RotoWire, generate a set of custom rankings, and I'll go through and tier each player at the key positions. And in theory, when you're making these tiers, the idea is that every player within a given tier is relatively equal. You feel okay landing any of them. The range of outcomes for those players you view as similar. That's somewhat the case, but you're going to have your preferences within each tier. So I also like to rank my players in order in those tiers, because there is a difference. If you get to a tier that has 7 or 8 players, I prefer the guy at number 1 as opposed to the guy at number 8. So something to think about when you're creating your own tiers. But we'll go through the tiers here. We'll talk about some of the players within each tier. We'll hit as many running backs as we can. Tier 1 for me, 4 players here: Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Saquon Barkley. I have Bijan Robinson as my number 1 running back this season. I'm totally okay taking him at the 1-1 every now and then. Hard to look away from Jamar Chase with that spot, but I think Bijan is a totally acceptable pick. I think we're going to see better quarterback play this season for the Atlanta Falcons. I think Kirk Cousins dragged down that offense with his inability to really do anything down the field for most of the season. We saw a much different version, a better version, more high volume version of Bijan Robinson over the second half of the season. Played really well in the 3 starts we saw of Michael Penix at the end of the year. So I think there can be increased volume. I think there'll be even more involvement in that passing game. And I think we see more big plays out of Bijan Robinson. We know he's capable of it. Didn't have a run that went for longer than 37 yards last season. So a lot to like with Bijan Robinson. I want to buy in on a guy who has not yet had his peak season. RB2 for me, Jahmyr Gibbs. We have some concerns about the offensive line. It's not in quite as great of a spot as it's been the last couple of years. Obviously, Ben Johnson is gone, and Gibbs himself is coming off of what you could say was maybe his best case season, but I think he can come close to replicating that. I think the Lions need him to do that, because if we are going to see any impact from the departure of Ben Johnson, I think it could be in the passing game. So I have Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of Saquon Barkley. Not going to quibble about really any order for these running backs. I think Barkley, Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson in particular, you could put those 3 in any order, and I'll buy in on it. But the reason I have Saquon number 3 among that group is I don't like buying in on a guy coming off of what is clearly the best season of his career. 2,000 plus yards, a ton of touches for Saquon Barkley last season. There's just not really much historical precedent for guys who run for 2,000 yards or even close to 2,000 yards and then follow it up with a season that's anywhere near that in terms of fantasy value. Injuries, of course, are a concern, especially given the usage last season. But you also wonder, did the Eagles make an effort to perhaps scale back his workload a bit? They summited the mountain last year. They accomplished their goal. They won the Super Bowl. Saquon had this unbelievable season. I think they're in the mode now where they're worried about getting back to that point, and maybe they don't push Saquon Barkley quite as hard in the regular season. Also, keep in mind, if you're in a full PPR league, Saquon Barkley is just not really a factor in the passing game. Only 33 catches on 43 targets last season, which of course pales in comparison to what you're getting out of Gibbs and Robinson. So at number 4, I decided to include Christian McCaffrey in this tier. Look, if you're watching this video, you know what you're signing up for with Christian McCaffrey. You know the risk-reward equation, but the reward is that you might get the 1-1 overall. So I think Christian McCaffrey, we recognize the upside here. He has to be included in tier 1. You could sell me on putting him in tier 2, given the injury risk, given the history, but we know what this guy's capable of when he's healthy. All right, so moving into tier 2. This is a bit of a smaller tier. We only have 3 running backs here, and that is Derrick Henry, Ashton Genty, and Devon Achane. 3 very different players. You got a veteran in Henry, a rookie in Ashton Genty, a third-year guy in Devon Achane. Henry's coming off another monster season. Father Time, of course, will catch up with him at some point, but I don't want to miss out. I don't want to miss out on Derrick Henry. I'm done trying to time the market on this guy falling off. It just doesn't seem like it's happening anytime soon. Most running backs of his age, the guys who have the mileage on their bodies like Derrick Henry does, durability would be a concern, but he is just such a physical freak that I think he's almost in his own category. 16 rushing touchdowns last season. Honestly, feels like he could top that this season, especially if we see Lamar Jackson take a step back as a passer. Those two didn't really cannibalize each other at all last season. Lamar had the best passing season of his career, 41 touchdown passes. Derrick Henry still had an elite year on the ground. He is another guy who doesn't really do a whole lot in the passing game, so that is somewhat of a concern. He is very ground game dependent, but it's Derrick Henry. We're not going to overthink this one. I got Ashton Genty at number 2 in the second tier, and it's all about projecting with Ashton Genty. We've seen plenty of year 1 running backs hit the ground running. You think of Zeke Elliott all the way back in 2016. could also bring up someone like Leonard Fournette, who faltered in a bad situation in Jacksonville. I think Ashton Jeanty is a better prospect than Leonard Fournette. I would be very surprised if this is a disappointing rookie season. I myself, tend to target guys who have more of a proven track record at the NFL level, but look, you have to respect the talent with Ashton Jeanty, and he's going to see a ton of work out in Vegas. Third in this tier, Devon Achane. You do have to worry a little bit about the workload given his frame, had injuries as a rookie, but you also got to give him credit for holding up last season. I think everybody thought he was going to get hurt last year, never really did. But I do have some questions about the Dolphins overall, the direction of that offense. Either way, Devon Achane should be a PPR monster, led all running backs and catches last season. Of course, played part of the year without Tua Tagovailoa. So he rounds out tier 2. Before we get to the rest of our tiers, highly encourage you to head over to rotowire.com. Use the promo code YouTube15. That'll get you 15% off any of our subscription products over at RotoWire. You might notice we got a new look. We got a great new website, a new color scheme, a new logo. Everything looks great over at RotoWire. The tools, the rankings, all of our data, better than ever. Go check it out. Use that code YouTube15 and go check out the RotoWire Fantasy Draft Kit app as well. All the tools you need. You can run mock drafts. You can plan out your draft strategy. Really, really great app. Really proud of that one for this season. So again, check that out and use that code YouTube15, 15% off. All right, so we're going to start expanding these tiers a little bit. We'll run through these names a little bit more quickly. Tier 3, we got 5 running backs in this tier. These are just rock solid, albeit slightly lower end RB1s compared to the players that we've talked about. We got some young guys. We got some guys right in the middle of their prime. But really the bottom line is you don't have any major liabilities in this tier. So we're looking at Bucky Irving, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, Chase Brown, and Kyron Williams. With Bucky Irving, not a whole lot to say, right? We saw what he was fully capable of by the end of last season. Really feels like Rachaad White finally deservedly taking a backseat in that offense. No Liam Cohen. He's now in Jacksonville. We'll see how things change, but totally fine taking Bucky Irving in round 2. All these guys, I will say, by the way, are very, very close to me. I went back and forth on the order, but settled on Bucky Irving at number 1. Josh Jacobs, number 2. I do have some questions about just how hard the Packers will ride him. Probably not quite as hard as they did over the second half of last season, but he's also not the type of guy who needs a massive workload to be really productive. 15 rushing touchdowns last season, and Green Bay doesn't really have another red zone threat in terms of another back on this roster, or even anybody that you have to worry about too much in that wide receiver core. So I think he's going to see a ton of opportunity close to the goal line, and does give you more production than you might think as a pass catcher. Would like to see him get back to the 50-plus catch guy that he was in Vegas, but I think that could come this season. Number 3, we got Jonathan Taylor. Injuries, missed time are always going to be a concern for him, but still pound for pound, one of the best running backs in the NFL. Colts quarterback situation, we don't love it, but this is nothing new for Jonathan Taylor. He's dealt with this in the past. Was still 6th in the NFL in total touches last season, despite only playing 14 games. Tied with Saquon Barkley, by the way, for the most carries per game at just about 22. So we like Jonathan Taylor again this year, firmly in tier 3 for me. We got Chase Brown at number 4. Hard to believe that this time last year we were seriously debating Chase Brown versus Zach Moss. I remember taking Zach Moss over Chase Brown in a fantasy draft. Just a brutal decision by me. But by week 4 last year, we saw Chase Brown grab this job and run with it, never gave it back. He was the RB7 last year in PPR from week 4 onward. 54 catches last year, by the way, for Chase Brown. He was the 3rd most targeted running back in the red zone, behind only Aaron Jones and Devon Achane. We finished out tier 3 with Kyron Williams. Never going to be a flashy pick, not somebody you're excited to click on, but Williams, once again, was clearly the guy for the Rams last season, despite the specter of Blake Corum, who everybody thought would take some of that workload. Never really did. Kyron Williams finished 3rd in total touches. Most of those came on the ground. He's not super explosive. He doesn't generate a ton of big plays. He's not this big threat in the passing game. But the bottom line is the LA Rams just ride Kyron Williams. As long as he's healthy, he is such a big part of that offense. Led all running backs in red zone carries last season by a mile. 70 carries in the red zone for Kyron Williams. He had 89% of the Rams' red zone carries, highest share of any back in the NFL by a pretty good margin. All right, we move now into tier 4. So if you're doing a wait on running back build, maybe these guys are your RB1, but really you're hoping that they're your RB2 and you've been able to grab at least one player from the previous 3 tiers. So in tier 2, it's an interesting mix, once again, of some young players, some veterans, guys who have team context or regression concerns. So much like tier 3, this is an interesting mix. You got some young guys, you got some veterans, but The issue here is that you could poke holes in the case for just about every player in this tier, whether it's a team context issue, a contract issue, regression concerns. These are guys that are RB2s to me for a reason. So we're talking Breece Hall, James Cook, Omarion Hampton, Alvin Kamara, Chuba Hubbard, Kenneth Walker, James Conner, Isaiah Pacheco, and Joe Mixon out in Houston. So a much larger tier here. But if you look at ADP, you'll notice that James Cook and Breece Hall tend to be the first two off the board. Ultimately, I'm okay with that. Jets are a very top-heavy offense in terms of skill position talent. I think they'll be really heavily reliant on both Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. You have kind of a wild card at quarterback in Justin Fields. Obviously, we like him for the rushing production, but he's also a check down monster. Loves checking it down. So I think we could see Breece Hall once again have a high volume receiving season. He's coming off a really bad year rushing wise, one of the lowest success rates in the NFL. Didn't get to 1,000 yards, but was still a major threat as a pass catcher. Only Alvin Kamara and Devon Achane drew more targets among running backs last season. So I think with Justin Fields running around back there, keeping defenses guessing, we do see more Breece Hall in the passing game. James Cook, obvious regression candidate, not getting to 16 touchdowns again this season. Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, they'll be involved, but I still want pieces of this Bills offense. They're projected to be the highest scoring team in the NFL. And keep in mind, regression could still mean 10, 11 touchdowns for James Cook. Omarion Hampton, technically in a timeshare with Najee Harris. We'll see how much of a setback Harris is dealing with after the incident over July 4th. So maybe that gives Omarion Hampton a bit of a leg up. But I think the Chargers need Hampton's explosiveness in the running game. So totally fine with him in tier 4. Alvin Kamara, all about PPR volume, even on a bad team. Still led all running backs in targets last season, despite missing some time. And maybe there's an argument to be made that if the Saints quarterbacks are as bad as we think they'll be, it's going to kill the value for someone like Chris Olave, but maybe we see a bunch of checkdowns. And I think Alvin Kamara can sustain that value, at least in PPR. As you get deeper into the tier, the two guys who I don't really click on very often, but they have to be in this tier, Kenneth Walker and James Conner. We're just not getting enough of a discount on Kenneth Walker, given the injury history, given a lot of question marks with that offense. You got your third offensive coordinator in 3 years in Seattle, and the fact that you have a really high-end backup in Zach Charbonnet. And then with James Conner, I think he missed, one game last season? That's the best case scenario for James Conner, especially at this point in his career. If anything, I've been grabbing a lot more Trey Benson as somewhat of a hedge that James Conner is going to miss more time this year. Pacheco, Joe Mixon, they finish out this tier. Not a big Joe Mixon guy this year. So much mileage on those tires. I mean, since he came into the league, only Derrick Henry has carried the ball more than Joe Mixon. I do like Pacheco quite a bit, though. We're starting to see that ADP rise. I think people are catching on to the fact that there's just not really an obvious number 2 in Kansas City. So Isaiah Pacheco firmly in that tier 4, but somebody who's going to continue to rise, I think, as we get closer to week 1. All right, we got 2 more tiers to get through here. Tier 5 and tier 6. Tier 5, these are your lower end RB2s, guys who are ideally your third running back. It's not always going to be the case. So we're looking at David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, Travis Etienne, Travion Henderson, RJ Harvey, Caleb Johnson, Tony Pollard, and Aaron Jones. With David Montgomery, we know the deal, right? Second running back, but still sees plenty of workload in what should, again, be a very good offense. Top 10 in red zone carries last season. Was top 5 in carries inside the 10, 6th in carries inside the 5. So you are banking on that touchdown production. If he doesn't get that, could be a little bit dicey. But even with losing Ben Johnson, I think this Lions team will score plenty of points. DeAndre Swift, I don't love the player, but reluctantly, I'm in at ADP. I mean, the Bears just don't really have anybody else. I keep waiting for them to make an acquisition, and they just haven't. Nick Chubb, J.K. Dobbins, guys like that, they've let sign elsewhere. So, look, it's a Ben Johnson offense. I think the Bears likely take a big step forward this season, and if that's going to be the case, DeAndre Swift will be a big part of it. Won't even say anything about Travis Etienne. You can watch almost any other video that I've done on our YouTube channel and see plenty of thoughts on why I'm in on Etienne. Travion Henderson, I think he wins that job over Ramondre Stevenson. Could be dicey early on, but a lot more upside with Henderson than Stevenson. Then you got a couple of rookies, RJ Harvey, Caleb Johnson, both in timeshares, but both, optimistic. I think that they could win those timeshares as the year goes along. With Tony Pollard and Aaron Jones, they're the final 2 names in this tier. I really like Tony Pollard, but everything the Titans are telling us is that we're going to see more Tajay Spears involvement overall. Now, that's going to require Tajay Spears to stay healthy, which might be the biggest hurdle in all of this, but I'm inclined to believe, Tennessee, that they want this to be more of an even split. So I had to move him down a bit within this tier. He was the RB21 last season. And Aaron Jones, an easy 8 out of 8 for me. I am fading Aaron Jones this season. One of my favorite players during his days in Green Bay, but really, really fell off in terms of red zone efficiency last season. I think health-wise, last year was also the best case scenario for a guy who's been banged up a ton throughout his career. And keep in mind, the Vikings went out and got Jordan Mason. And everything they're telling us is that this will be a 1A, 1B. I'm not saying Aaron Jones is going to lose his job necessarily, but I think there's a world in which the Minnesota Vikings realize midseason, hey, Jordan Mason might just be a better player at this point in his career, certainly better around the goal line. So Aaron Jones coming in at number 8 within tier 5. Tier 6, we'll run through this one very rapidly. These are guys who are in obvious timeshares, but there is some upside. Top of that list for me is Jordan Mason. Just talked about Aaron Jones. I think Jordan Mason is going to have a major role in that offense. Brian Robinson, he's your starter in Washington, but still going to be splitting time with Austin Eckler. Quinshon Judkins, had to put him in this tier for now, just a total wait and see situation with the legal issues. And then we get into, some of these secondary running backs, Zach Charbonnet, Ramondre Stevenson, Najee Harris. These are all guys I like, but all guys who are, to me, the clear number 2 within their own offense. Tyrone Tracy, Jalen Warren, Javonte Williams, J.K. Dobbins, Cam Scatterbo, and Rashad White finish out tier 6.